The day Kibo Preparatory Academy destroyed my future, my best friend was standing 3 steps away holding research he had stolen from me. That was the part I couldn't stop looking at. Not the 6 instructors seated behind the blackwood table, not the blue flames burning above the disciplinary chamber, not even the cracked testing array floating behind them with ugly purple veins of abyssal mana crawling through its runes. Sefu. He had my equations, my diagrams. My handwriting had been copied neatly enough that most people probably wouldn't notice the difference, but I noticed. I had spent 4 months drawing those frequency curves while everyone else in my dormitory was sleeping. Sefu wouldn't look at me. That told me almost everything. The rest came from instructor Balo. Amani Mrema, 16 years old, second-year candidate, wind channel classification, he said. Your examination array produced a forbidden abyssal resonance at 14 times the permitted threshold. 14 times sounded dramatic. It was also impossible. I knew because I had built the filtering sequence that should have prevented exactly that. Someone changed the third stabilizer, I said. Balo's expression didn't move. The stabilizer was inspected. Then inspected again. Sefu finally looked at me. There was guilt in his face. For about half a second. Then it hardened into something worse. Resolve. That hurt more. Because Sefu wasn't being forced. He had chosen this. 7 months earlier, I had woken in the academy infirmary with 2 completely incompatible lives trying to occupy the same skull. In one, I was 16-year-old Amani Mrema, a scholarship student from Arusha with mediocre wind magic, excellent mathematics scores, and a mother who sold enchanted climbing cloth near the lower markets. In the other, I had been a 34-year-old telecommunications engineer in Dar es Salaam. No magic, plenty of traffic, an unhealthy relationship with coffee, and 14 years spent thinking about signals, carrier frequencies, interference, noise, multiplexing, network congestion. The last thing I remembered from that life was rain on a windshield and headlights turning sideways. Then I had opened my eyes beneath a carved wooden ceiling, while a healer told me I had collapsed during mana practice. Transmigration was not on any engineering certification exam I had ever taken. I adapted. Mostly. My biggest problem was that everyone said this body's magic was defective. A normal mage resonated strongly with one channel. Fire, water, wind, stone, lightning, plant, light, shadow. A gifted person might manage 2. Historic prodigies sometimes manage 3. I apparently resonated badly with everything. My teachers called it unstable mana. I called it suspicious. Because when I actually paid attention, I wasn't feeling one weak signal. I was feeling dozens of overlapping ones. My soul wasn't failing to tune into magic. It was receiving too much of it. The first time I tried filtering mana mentally the way I would isolate a radio signal, I accidentally turned a beginner wind pulse into something that punched a thumb-sized hole through a training barrier. I stared at the hole, then at my hand, then back at the hole. That was the moment I realized my second life might become extremely interesting. My second discovery was less elegant. I tried using the same principle to heat tea. The cup exploded. Not violently. Just enough to cover my uniform, desk, and dignity in sweet milk. That problem never improved. Apparently I could rethink magical theory, but warming chai remained beyond me. Sefu had been the first person I told about the larger discovery. We had been friends since the original Amani was 11. He knew my family. I knew his. We studied together, cheated each other at Bao, and had spent 3 years promising we would enter Bahari University of Arcana together. Bahari was the summit. At least that was what everyone at Kibo believed. It sat on an enchanted island off Zanzibar, drew students from across the continent, and produced royal researchers, master healers, ward architects, and battle mages whose names ended up in textbooks. Kibo awarded one full Bahari research scholarship each year. Sefu and I had both wanted it. I had simply never realized he wanted it more than he wanted me as a friend. You've been experimenting with forbidden resonance, Balo continued. No. Abyssal mana appeared in your array. Because someone put it there. Balo tapped the papers Sefu had provided. My papers. Your classmate independently developed a theoretical model involving cross-channel resonance 3 months ago. 3 months. I almost laughed. I had shown Sefu the first version 4 months ago. The idiot had even copied one of my early mistakes. A minus sign where a phase term should have been positive. I had fixed it 6 days later. Sefu apparently hadn't understood enough to notice. I looked at him. He looked away again. That was when the anger finally arrived. Not loud anger. Cold anger. The kind that settles into your ribs. Kibo suspended my Bahari application that afternoon. Then they refused to certify me for the national entrance examinations. They did not formally expel me. That would have required a broader investigation. Instead, they did something cleaner. They declared me academically unsafe. It meant no accredited magical institution in the northern provinces would accept my application without Kibo's recommendation. Sefu received the scholarship nomination 2 weeks later. I remember sitting outside the academy gates with my trunk beside me, looking back at the towers I had spent years trying to enter properly. I had expected grief. Instead, my engineer brain started doing what it always did when a system failed. I mapped alternative routes. Kibo controlled the academic road to Bahari. Fine. It did not control field licensing. It did not control independent magical research. It did not control guild certification. And Bahari did not only accept students. It hired specialists, researchers, expedition mages, consultants, people who knew things the university needed. I had no money, no recommendation, and a reputation for forbidden magic. What I did have was a wooden trunk, 6 silver pieces, and a magical core nobody understood. So I looked west, toward the Abyssal Forest, and I decided that if Kibo had closed the front gate, I was going to become the kind of person universities invited through the side door. The Mara Bounty Guild smelled like wet leather, burnt herbs, and people who had not slept properly in years. I liked it immediately. Nobody there asked for my academic ranking. They asked whether I could read, whether I could follow a map, whether I knew enough healing magic to keep myself alive until a real healer arrived, and whether I understood that the guild would not refund my registration fee if something ate me. That last rule was printed twice. I paid 3 of my 6 silver pieces for a provisional license. The clerk handed me a small ironwood badge with a single carved line across it. Lowest rank, she said. I gathered that. You may accept green board contracts only. What happens if I take something higher? You die. Administrative penalty. Death is generally considered sufficient. I liked her too. My first problem was equipment. Kibo students carried calibrated staffs, protective robes, and neat little cases filled with standardized spell components. I had a second-hand cloak, A short staff with a cracked grip and boots that made a noise like two frogs arguing whenever the road became wet. My second problem was that I knew almost nothing about the Abyssal Forest. That was how I met Kweka. She was 17, wore her hair in short twists beneath a green head scarf, and had 6 map tubes strapped across her back. The first thing she ever said to me was, "You're holding your compass upside down." I looked at it, then at her, then turned it over. "Testing you." "Of course." She walked away. I followed her. Nima was a junior ranger, which sounded impressive until I learned junior rangers were basically the people senior hunters sent first when they wanted to know whether a bridge was safe. Her real obsession was cartography. The Abyssal Forest resisted normal mapping magic. Paths shifted. Mana currents distorted distance. Some valleys appeared half a kilometer from where they had been the previous month. Nima wanted the royal cartographer's license, and the licensing board wanted something considered almost impossible: a stable deep forest map. My first contract was not glamorous. 3 enchanted goats had escaped from a spice farmer. The guild paid 2 copper coins per goat. Sefu was probably preparing for Bahari entrance lectures. I was chasing glowing livestock through thorn bushes. Life has a sense of humor. The first goat bit me. The second climbed a tree. I still do not know how. The third led us nearly 2 kilometers into a patch of forest where my skin started prickling. Nima stopped immediately. Mana fog. I could see why she hated it. To my new senses, ordinary magic felt like music from separate rooms. Wind had a thin, rising pressure. Stone was low and dense. Lightning almost buzzed behind my teeth. The mana fog was like every instrument in an orchestra tuning at once, while someone dropped metal plates down a staircase. Nima pulled a small charm from her pocket. The blue stone flickered twice and died. "Tracking charms don't work here," she said. We turned back. The goat stared at us from 30 meters away. It had found this very entertaining. I closed my eyes. Back in my first life, noise was rarely truly random. There were sources, patterns, repeated interference. Filters did not need silence. They needed something predictable enough to remove. I isolated wind first, then pushed everything else mentally to the edges. It took 12 minutes. By the end, sweat was running down my neck. Then suddenly, the magical chaos thinned. The wind channel became clean. Not strong. Clean. I opened my eyes and cast a basic location pulse. The spell traveled through the fog without collapsing. Nima's mouth opened. The goat sneezed. "How did you do that?" "Filtered the noise." "What does that mean?" "I removed the magic I didn't want." She stared at me. "That is not how mana works." "Apparently it is." I found the goat. Then I tried warming the tea we had brought. It boiled out of the cup and burned my fingers. Nima laughed so hard she had to sit down. That was the beginning of our partnership. My first month was not heroic. I tracked missing animals. I cleared biting vine clusters from caravan routes. I escorted 2 herbalists who argued constantly about whether a mushroom was poisonous, until one of them finally ate it to prove a point. It was poisonous. Mildly. He spent 6 hours regretting science. But every contract gave me data. A stone-backed antelope carried earth mana through layered channels. A river spirit shifted between water and wind, depending on pressure. Certain baobab roots stored mana in repeating pulses that acted almost like natural relay towers. I started filling notebooks. Nima filled maps. We discovered that if I sent a filtered wind pulse along one of her measured routes, the returning resonance gave us distance more accurately than any guild compass. She changed her map symbols. I changed my spell. Then she changed the map again. We argued constantly. "You can't keep naming things version 4, she told me. "Why not?" "Because normal people give spells names. Version 4 is a name. It is an accounting error." She started naming them herself. My filtered location pulse became echo thread. My compressed wind strike became needle wind. My attempt to create a multidirectional scanning field became spider ear, which I hated so much that she used it exclusively. Then something unexpected happened. My body started adapting. At Kibo, mana practice had always exhausted me because I had been wrestling against every channel at once. Now that I was separating them, cultivation became almost absurdly efficient. My core stopped wasting energy fighting itself. Within 6 weeks, I had the mana capacity expected of a final-year Kibo student. 3 weeks later, I passed it. That should have taken years. The first person to notice was not me. It was an old guild mage named Musa. He watched me reinforce a bridge ward after a storm. Then he frowned. "Do that again." I did. His frown deepened. "What year did you say you were at Kibo?" "Second." "No. That wasn't a question." He looked at my badge. One carved line. Lowest rank. Then at the bridge ward, which now hummed more cleanly than it had before. "You children are becoming annoying." I grinned. For the first time since leaving Kibo, I felt something I had almost forgotten. Fun. I was poor. My reputation was terrible. My best friend had stolen my research. But every morning I entered a forest professional mages feared. And every evening I came back understanding magic a little better. Kibo had taught me spells. The Abyssal Forest was teaching me why spells worked. That difference was about to become enormous. The first time I realized the forest could make me stronger instead of weaker, Nima and I were running from 6 glass-backed hyenas. Before you ask, yes, running was part of the strategy. I just had not designed the rest yet. The contract had been simple. A caravan route south of the guild had gone silent. We were supposed to determine why. The answer had teeth. Glass-backed hyenas were pack predators about the size of small ponies, with translucent plates growing along their spines. Those plates absorbed ambient mana and released it in short bursts. 1 hyena was manageable. 6 were a career decision. Nima vaulted a fallen trunk. I followed. A blue flash cracked behind us and shattered bark from a tree. "Any brilliant ideas?" she shouted. "Several. Good ones. Still evaluating." We reached a narrow ravine. Bad terrain. 1 exit. Steep stone walls. Nima looked at me with the expression she reserved for situations where my intelligence had failed to produce wisdom. "You led us into a hole." I noticed. The hyenas spread across the entrance. Their back plates started glowing. I felt 6 separate magical patterns charging. At Kibo, I would have cast a barrier. In the Abyssal Forest, a normal barrier would have been unreliable. Too much interference. That was when the obvious question finally occurred to me. Why was I treating ambient mana as interference? Interference was only unwanted signal. If I wanted it, it became input. I dropped my own barrier spell before completing it. Nima's eyes widened. "Amani, trust me. I am reconsidering that." I reached outward mentally. The forest roared against my senses. Wind, heat, Plant mana. Stone. Water trapped in the soil. The strange dark pulse everyone called abyssal contamination. Instead of blocking it, I aligned the easiest frequencies with my own casting rhythm. The first attempt hurt. A sharp pressure slammed through my skull. My hearing disappeared on the left side. I nearly fell. Then the pattern clicked. The ravine filled with wind. Not from me. From everywhere. I was not generating the spell anymore. I was conducting it. The hyenas released their mana bursts. I shifted the phase of the wind current by half a cycle. Their attacks struck the flow and bent sideways. 6 blue bolt smashed harmlessly into the ravine walls. Mrema stared. The hyenas stared. I would like to pretend I delivered a clever line. I was too busy trying not to faint. I used the same current to create a pressure wave. Not enough to injure them badly. Enough to send 6 surprised magical predators tumbling backward into the brush. Then Mrema grabbed my sleeve and dragged me out through a side crack I had failed to notice. We ran for another kilometer. My hearing returned 2 hours later. Mostly. For the rest of the day, everyone sounded as if they were speaking through a blanket. That became the first real limitation of resonance weaving. My mind could understand far more magic than my body could safely process. Filtering 1 channel was easy. 2 was tiring. 3 made my hands shake. Pulling power from the forest itself could multiply my output, but the wrong alignment sent the pressure back through me. I needed control. So I trained. Not by throwing bigger spells at rocks. I trained precision. I separated drops of water by temperature. I made 2 wind currents cross without mixing. I balanced stone mana against plant mana until a seedling grew through a crack without breaking either side. Mrema thought this was hilarious. You've become the most dangerous gardener in Tanzania. Progress is progress. My next breakthrough came from something Kibo taught students not to do. Cast different elements simultaneously. Traditional magical theory said channels interfered inside the caster. They were right. But interference could be managed. I started with wind and lightning. That combination almost knocked me unconscious. Then water and stone. Better. Then wind, stone, and lightning together. I compressed stone into a marble-sized projectile, used wind to stabilize it, and lightning to create a magnetic acceleration field. The first test shot vanished. We found it embedded in a boulder 60 meters away. Mrema walked over to the hole. Then back to me. That seems unnecessary. It was extremely necessary. For what? I'll know when something needs a very small hole from very far away. The guild started giving us harder contracts. Our badges gained lines. 1, 2, 3. By my 5th month in the forest, I had reached a mana capacity equivalent to licensed senior apprentices. But raw capacity mattered less and less. The real growth was in combinations. My echo thread became a full 3-dimensional mapping pulse. My barriers stopped resisting attacks and started redirecting them. I learned to identify the dominant frequency inside another mage's spell. The first time I used that against a person was during a guild assessment. A senior hunter named Juma offered to test me. Juma was 38 and specialized in fire. He was strong enough that the assessment supervisor placed 3 protective wards around the ring. "Don't worry," he told me, "I'll keep it gentle." I believed him. He launched a fire lance. I felt the carrier pattern. Fire mana oscillated around 1 dominant rhythm, reinforced by 2 smaller harmonics. I touched the largest one with a wind pulse and shifted it slightly. The fire lance unraveled halfway across the ring. Not exploded. Not blocked. It simply stopped being a spell. Juma froze. The supervisor leaned forward. Again, Juma said. He cast faster. Same result. Third spell. Same. Fourth. I did not move. By the fifth attempt, he lowered his hands. What are you doing? Interrupting the resonance. Stop. That's the assessment. No, stop explaining it like those words mean anything. That assessment earned me a 5-line badge. More importantly, it created rumors. A teenage mage who could cancel spells. A Kibo dropout who grew stronger inside mana fog. A bounty hunter who used 6 channels when most licensed mages used 1. I hated the rumors. Mrema collected them. Her favorite was that I was secretly 3 dwarves standing on one another's shoulders under a glamour. She repeated that one for weeks. Then the Night Lion bounty appeared. 7 guild teams had already failed to capture it. 2 had returned without completing the hunt. The others had abandoned equipment and escaped through emergency gates. The guild classified the creature above our rank. Mrema and I had absolutely no intention of accepting the contract. The forest accepted it for us. We found the Night Lion standing in the middle of one of Mrema's unfinished map routes. It was twice the size of an ordinary lion. Its mane looked like black smoke filled with stars. The air around it bent. My first instinct was fear. My second was analysis. 6 months earlier, I would have seen a monster. Now I saw structure. Stone mana reinforced its bones. Shadow mana distorted distance. Wind enhanced acceleration. Abyssal frequencies formed an outer armor. 4 channels. Layered. Interdependent. I suddenly knew exactly where to touch the system. The Night Lion charged. Mrema whispered, Amani. I see it. You always say that right before something becomes complicated. The lion crossed 20 meters in less than a second. I released a narrow cancellation pulse. Its abyssal armor vanished. A second pulse disrupted the wind channel, driving its movement. Its charge slowed just enough. Then I redirected the stone reinforcement in its front legs into the ground. The Night Lion stopped. Not gently. It skidded through wet leaves, rolled once and landed 3 meters from us. It tried to rise. I shifted the shadow frequency. Its spatial distortion disappeared. The terrifying creature that had broken 7 guild teams suddenly looked like an exhausted, oversized cat. I stood there breathing hard. Mrema stared at the lion. Then at me. Then back at the lion. That was it. I almost laughed. Because I understood what she meant. The Night Lion had been one of the forest's great threats. A creature senior hunters planned entire expeditions around. And I had dismantled its magic in less than 20 seconds. That should have felt like victory. Instead, when I examined the creature's resonance closely, I found something that did not belong. A 13th pattern. Not one of the channels taught at Kibo. Not anything in the Mara Guild manuals. A signal embedded beneath its natural magic. Artificial. Precise. And pointing deeper into the forest. The guild celebrated the Night Lion capture for 3 days. I spent those same 3 days staring at a resonance diagram. The creature was alive. We had sedated it, transferred it into a reinforced habitat, and earned more money from one bounty than I had made in the previous 4 months combined. My share was 42 gold pieces. Enough to replace my boots. I considered buying new ones. Then I discovered the old pair no longer squeaked after being soaked in Night Lion mud. Problem solved. The strange resonance bothered me more than money. It repeated every 9 seconds. A clean pulse. No natural creature produced something that regular. Nima spread her maps across our table at the Guild Inn. Could be a tracking mark. Too deep. A curse. Too stable. A summons. Maybe. She tapped a blank region on her map. The direction of the signal pointed straight into it. No guild survey in 12 years has gone beyond this ridge. Why? Because people enjoy living. Unhelpful. Accurate. The guild master refused our request for permission. Then Professor Zara Moyo arrived. I did not know who she was at first. She wore a plain cream traveling coat, carried no visible staff, and looked more like a tired lecturer than one of the strongest mages I had ever stood near. What gave her away was the room. Experienced hunters unconsciously moved aside when she walked through it. Not from fear. Recognition. She placed a Bahari University seal on the guild master's desk. I had spent months trying not to think about Bahari. Seeing that seal still tightened something in my chest. Zara had come because the university had detected the same pulse. The night lion was not transmitting outward. Something deeper in the forest was pinging it. She needed guides. Nima knew the terrain better than anyone our age. I could detect the pulse without specialized instruments. The guild master looked between us. No. Zara looked at him. I was not asking whether they should go alone. That was how I joined a Bahari expedition, without ever passing Bahari's entrance examination. There were 8 of us. Professor Zara, 2 university researchers, 3 licensed guards, Nima, me. For the first 4 days, I was impressed. On the 5th, I became offended. Bahari mages were cheating. Not literally. But compared with Kibo, they were playing an entirely different game. Their spell structures contained layers I had never seen. They used minor elemental interactions as casually as Kibo teachers used basic wards. One researcher stored 6 prepared spell frames in a bracelet and switched between them without rebuilding the runes. Professor Zara was worse. I watched her stabilize a collapsing stone shelf using earth, wind, light, and something I could not identify. 4 channels. Simultaneously. Effortlessly. I had spent months nearly deafening myself learning that. You can use 4 channels, I said. She looked at me. 9. I stopped walking. Nima walked into my back. You broke him, she told Zara. Zara smiled. Only 9 reliably. Only. That evening, I asked questions until one of the researchers threatened to bury my notebook. Bahari classified magic differently from Kibo. Provincial schools taught what they called the 8 practical channels. Bahari recognized 12 major bands and dozens of sub-bands. Most people still specialized, but high-spectrum researchers studied interactions. My pride survived approximately 3 hours. Then something else happened. Zara asked how I had disabled the Night Lion's armor. I demonstrated the cancellation sequence. She went quiet. Again. I did. She asked for the mathematical model. I drew it. She stared at the page for so long, I became uncomfortable. Finally, she said, "Who taught you phase cancellation?" No one. That term does not exist in standard magical theory. It does now. She looked at me differently after that. Not as a child. Not exactly as an equal either. More like someone had discovered an unfamiliar machine humming inside their kitchen. The expedition pushed beyond Nima's maps. The forest changed. Trees became wider. Mana density doubled. My old filtering methods began reaching their limits. That should have made me weaker. Instead, the stronger ambient field gave me more material. I adjusted. By the 7th day, I could maintain 6 channels simultaneously for nearly 3 minutes. By the 9th, I discovered Zara's 4th unidentified element was not an element at all. It was a stabilizing band between channels. A carrier. Once I understood that, my efficiency jumped again. Zara noticed. You copied that. I understood it. You watched me cast it twice. 3 times. That does not improve your defense. Nima grinned. I've been telling people he's irritating. On the 12th day, we found the Black Root Observatory. It was buried beneath a hill covered in silverleaf vines. The entrance had no door. Just 12 black stone rings embedded vertically inside one another. Each ring carried markings and a script none of the expedition could read. I could not read it either, but I could feel the frequencies. 12 bands, the same 12 Zara had described. I touched the outer ring. Wind responded. Second ring. Stone. Third. Water. One by one, I fed them clean resonance. 6 rings lit. The entire observatory woke. Light spilled through buried lines in the hill. Stone rotated beneath our feet. Nima grabbed my sleeve. The researchers started shouting readings. I expected some grand, magical revelation. Instead, a calm voice emerged from the structure. Not spoken language. Direct resonance. A pattern my mind somehow interpreted. Calibration incomplete. 6 of 12 foundation bands confirmed. Foundation. I looked at Zara. She looked genuinely pale. Professor. She did not answer immediately. Then she touched the 7th ring. It lit. Then the 8th. Then 9th. She stopped. The observatory responded. Partial calibration. Below threshold for transit authority. Transit. Authority. Those were not words anyone wanted to hear inside an ancient ruin nobody knew existed. The central floor opened. Beneath it was a chamber containing a map. Not of the forest. Not of Tanzania. Not even of Africa. A sphere of light appeared in the air. Our entire known world was marked with hundreds of points. Most were dark. 3 glowed faintly. Then lines extended beyond the sphere. Outward. Into empty space. For 6 months, I had been congratulating myself for becoming powerful. I had surpassed Kibo students. Then guild hunters. Then senior mages who once seemed untouchable. Now an ancient machine had just described the magical spectrum I was rediscovering as foundation-level calibration. I had become the biggest fish I knew. And someone had finally shown me the edge of the pond. The Black Root Observatory should have been the most important discovery of my life. Instead, 2 days later, Sefu walked into it. I recognized his voice before I saw his face. Amani. My entire body went rigid. He stood behind a Bahari student delegation, wearing blue coastal robes embroidered with silver wave patterns. Bahari colors. For one ugly second, I was back in Kibo's disciplinary chamber. My research in his hands. Balo's voice calling me unsafe. The academy gates closing behind me. Sefu looked different. Better dressed. More confident. But his eyes did the same thing they had done that day. They moved away first. Professor Zara noticed. Of course she did. She noticed everything. You know one another. Sefu smiled too quickly. We studied together. Interesting, I said. Nima moved closer to me. Not dramatically, just close enough that I noticed. The Bahari delegation had arrived because the observatory's activation sent a pulse all the way to the university. Sefu was attached to a student research group studying cross-channel resonance. My field, or according to Bahari's records, his. That almost made me laugh. Almost. His stolen paper had gotten him noticed. The simplified theory he submitted at Kibo became the basis for a Bahari junior research placement. There was one problem. He had stolen an unfinished version. I had changed almost everything since then. During the first joint briefing, a Bahari lecturer asked Sefu to explain how his resonance model interacted with the observatory's seventh stabilizing band. Sefu froze. That wasn't part of my original scope. Reasonable answer. Then the lecturer asked whether his phase term should remain negative under a moving carrier frequency. I looked down at my notes. That minus sign. The mistake he had copied. Sefu started speaking. A lot. People who understand something deeply usually become simpler when challenged. People pretending often become complicated. He described monattension, adaptive channel polarity, a theoretical inversion effect. Beautiful phrases. None answered the question. The lecturer frowned. I did not say anything. I did not need to. The observatory created a larger problem for all of us. The pulse activating the night lion had come from beneath the facility. A sealed region sat below the map chamber. Professor Zara called it a breach. Not a portal. Not exactly. It was a place where magical frequencies entered our world without passing through normal environmental channels. The observatory had apparently been built to monitor it. For centuries, the breach had remained quiet. Now it was changing frequencies every few seconds. Bahari's researchers tried sealing it. Their first ward failed in 14 minutes. Second lasted 9. Third lasted 32 seconds. Each time, the breach shifted around the spell. Watching it felt strangely familiar. I sat on the floor for an hour before I understood why. Frequency hopping. In my first life, communication systems could jump between channels to avoid interference or interception. The breach was doing something similar. Every fixed sealing spell targeted one state. By the time the spell locked, the breach had moved. We need a ward that moves with it, I said. One of the researchers shook his head. Wards are fixed structures. Then don't make it fixed. That is what a ward is. That sounds like a design limitation, not a law of reality. Zara gave me the look she used when deciding whether I was brilliant or exhausting. What are you proposing? A spell that listens before it responds. Silence. I explained adaptive tuning. Not the engineering version. They would have thrown me into the forest. I described a network of smaller spell nodes. Each node would measure the breach. Share the result. Adjust together. No single central rune controlling everything. A self-correcting lattice. Bahari's researchers objected for 3 hours. Then the breach doubled in size. They stopped objecting. Building the lattice required 24 resonant anchors around the chamber. Nima mapped safe positions based on the observatory's geometry. Zara supplied high-spectrum stabilizers. I built the adaptive logic. Sefu volunteered his cross-channel theory. That was when things became painful. His model didn't work. Not badly. Catastrophically. 3 anchors immediately fell out of synchronization. One overloaded. Another reversed its flow. Zara shut the lattice down before it damaged the observatory. Everyone stared at the diagrams. Sefu was sweating. I knew exactly what had happened. His negative phase term. The old mistake. The one I had corrected 4 months before he stole the work. I could have exposed him right there. I wanted to. Instead, I fixed it. Because the breach did not care about my revenge. Nemo was standing inside that chamber. So were 6 researchers who had done nothing to me. I replaced Sefu's phase sequence with my current model. The lattice stabilized. Not completely, but enough. Sefu watched me write. He knew. I knew he knew. That evening, he found me outside the observatory. You could have said something. I just did. You know what I mean. I looked at him. For months, I had imagined this conversation. In some versions, I shouted. In others, he apologized. In several deeply satisfying versions, lightning was involved. Reality was quieter. Why? His jaw tightened. You were going to win the scholarship. Probably. My family had spent 12 years telling everyone I would go to Bahari. So you stole my work. I was desperate. You sabotaged my examination. He said nothing. That silence answered another question. I had hoped Balo had done that part independently. Apparently not. You could have killed me. The array was supposed to fail certification, not overload. That did not help. He looked toward the observatory. You don't understand what happens if I lose Bahari. I almost laughed. You mean I'll have to imagine it? He flinched. Good. I hated that feeling. Not because he didn't deserve the words. Because I enjoyed seeing them land. For months, I had told myself power would make betrayal stop hurting. It didn't. It just made retaliation easier. That was different. I am not covering for you, I said. Sefu's face changed. I didn't ask. You were about to. He closed his mouth. I also won't destroy this expedition just to expose you. When Bahari asks who developed the theory, I'll answer honestly. What happens after that is yours. He looked frightened. I expected satisfaction. Instead, I mostly felt tired. Then the observatory alarm sounded. The breach had changed again. And suddenly Sefu was the least important problem in the room. That realization surprised me more than anything. For the next 11 days, the breach became my university. Not Bahari. The breach itself. Every time our adaptive lattice stabilized one pattern, another appeared. Some frequencies behaved like elements. Others behaved like rules. One reduced the weight of nearby stone. Another bent spell trajectories. A third caused prepared runes to repeat themselves twice. Bahari had names for several. I did not. So I did what I always did. I measured, compared, failed, adjusted. My power grew faster during those 11 days than during the previous 6 months. Not because my mana doubled, because my understanding did. There is a point in any technical field where learning one new idea does more than add one tool. It reorganizes everything you already know. The 7th stabilizing band did that for me. Then the 8th. Then the 9th. Professor Zara could manipulate all 9 reliably. I could barely hold 8 for 12 seconds without my vision blurring. That bothered me. For months, I had been the anomaly. Now I had found someone better. I became extremely annoying about it. Again. No. Professor. I have shown you that sequence 6 times. 7 would be statistically cleaner. Go away. Nima loved this. The first time Zara physically closed a book in my face, Nima applauded. But even Zara had limits. She understood higher band through formal structures refined over centuries. I understood interactions through a model Bahari had never used. She could create effects I could not reproduce. I could sometimes simplify spells she thought were already optimal. We became, against everyone's better judgment, useful to each other. The breach forced that relationship. Our first adaptive lattice used 24 nodes. I reduced it to 16. Zara increased the stability by adding a 9th band carrier. I altered the node timing so the network predicted the next frequency shift, instead of reacting after it happened. One researcher accused us of turning magical theory into an argument with architecture. He was not wrong. Meanwhile, Sefu's situation deteriorated without me doing anything. Bahari researchers kept asking him questions. His answers remained shallow. Then one of them compared his original paper against the models I was building. The notation style was similar, not suspicious by itself. Then she found the copied error. Sefu's published equation contained the same incorrect negative phase term that appeared in one of my old Kibo drafts. The university requested his research notebooks. He delayed. They requested Kibo's submission records. He became ill. Apparently, academic integrity causes sudden fevers. The deeper problem arrived before Bahari could finish investigating him. The breach began affecting the forest. Mana fog expanded 30 kilometers in one night. Predators migrated toward settlements. Guild communications failed. 3 caravan roads closed. Then the first pulse reached the coast. Professor Zara received an emergency message from Bahari. The university's Western Mana network had begun fluctuating. That should have been impossible. Bahari was hundreds of kilometers away. The observatory map answered why. When we activated it, we had not created a new connection. We had awakened an old one. Blackroot was one node in a much larger network. Bahari University had unknowingly built parts of its modern ward system on the remains of another ancient node near Zanzibar. The breach was now moving through both. Suddenly, the problem was no longer a forest anomaly. If the oscillation continued, Bahari's coastal defenses, transport gates and mana reactors would start falling out of synchronization. Zara looked at me. We need to return. I expected her to leave me behind. Instead, she said, both of you. Nima pointed at herself. I'm a map maker. You mapped the node geometry better than my researchers. Then Zara looked at me. And you are the only person here who understands the adaptive lattice well enough to rebuild it at scale. That was how I entered Bahari University. Not with a student acceptance letter. Not through the admissions courtyard. Through an emergency gate, while half the Western Ward network was flickering. My younger self had imagined arriving in ceremonial robes. Reality gave me mud-covered boots and 2 hours of sleep. Bahari was still magnificent. Even during a crisis. The university spread across 3 linked islands, surrounded by luminous seawalls. Lecture halls floated above gardens. Bridges of hardened water connected towers. Small transport discs carried students over courtyards. The central library was built around a living coral structure that stored spell impressions inside its branches. I had spent years believing Kibo was sophisticated. Kibo suddenly felt like a village classroom. Then I saw a first-year Bahari student casually maintain 3 simultaneous channels while eating fruit. I nearly walked into a pillar. Nima noticed. Big fish. Be quiet. Small pond. I regret teaching you metaphors. The university placed us in a research hall beneath the Western Ward Tower. There I discovered something humbling. My local reputation meant nothing. Nobody cared that I had captured a night lion. Bahari students trained against creatures more dangerous in supervised classes. Nobody cared that I could use 6 channels. Advanced researchers considered that remarkable for my age, not impossible. Nobody cared that Mara Guild hunters thought my spell cancellation was legendary. Bahari had 3 separate departments studying magical disruption. For the first time since my power began accelerating, I was not automatically special because I was stronger. I loved it. Then I demonstrated phase cancellation against one of their disruption wards. Their instrument stopped measuring at 12% of my output. The room became quiet. That part I also enjoyed. Professor Zara sighed. Do not encourage him. Nima smiled. Too late. Bahari was larger than my pond. But I was not ordinary here either. That mattered, because the crisis was still growing. And within 4 days, every established solution Bahari tried had failed. Which meant the university that had once been my impossible dream finally asked the question I had wanted them to ask for nearly a year. Amani, Zara said, standing before a table covered in unstable network diagrams, what would you do? My answer was, stop treating the university like one spell. Nobody liked that. There were 12 professors in the room, 3 department heads, 2 ward architects, a Mana Systems director, and one 17-year-old former prep school student explaining that their entire infrastructure was conceptually wrong. I understood why their faces looked offended. I continued anyway. Bahari's Western network used a central synchronization core. Every transport gate, seawall, ward tower and reactor took timing instructions from it. Normally, that was efficient. During breach interference, it became a weakness. When the central rhythm shifted incorrectly, everything connected to it shifted incorrectly. One failure became hundreds. In my first life, we had similar problems. A network built around one perfect central point was very efficient until that point stopped being perfect. What do you propose? The Mana director asked. Distributed control. Blank expressions. I pointed to the diagram. Let the ward towers communicate directly. Each one measures local conditions. Each shares what it sees. The network agrees on the stable pattern instead of waiting for one core to command it. That would require constant recalculation. Yes. No spell structure can do that. The Black Root lattice already does. At 16 nodes. So we scale it to 840. Yes. Someone laughed. Not mockingly. More like the body sometimes laughs when the brain rejects information. Professor Zara did not. What would it cost? That was the correct question. Power. Enormous power. 840 adaptive nodes would consume more mana than I could produce. More than Zara could produce. Possibly more than the Western reactor system could spare. Unless we stopped thinking like individual mages. The university already had thousands of independent magical systems running continuously. Every tower had surplus capacity at different times. Every transport gate stored reserve mana. Every laboratory maintained emergency crystals. Every student dormitory had localized ward batteries. The energy existed. It was simply separated. We don't power the lattice from one source, I said. We let every node contribute. The Mana director stared at me. That is not how spell ownership works. I was starting to hate that sentence. Magic at Bahari was built around control. Every spell had a caster. Every ward had a registered owner. Every artifact had a controlling core. The idea of hundreds of independent systems contributing to one spell, without surrendering control, sounded unsafe. To me, it sounded like a network. The debate lasted 9 hours. The breach did not wait. By midnight, 2 western transport gates failed. By dawn, the seawall flickered. At 7:20 in the morning, the central synchronization core began oscillating. They approved my plan at 7:31. Funny how flexible tradition becomes when the ocean starts entering the courtyard. We had 30 hours before the next predicted resonance peak. Mrema coordinated physical node placement, using the geometry she had learned from Black Root. Professor Zara translated my adaptive logic into high-spectrum runes the university infrastructure could actually process. I built the synchronization model. Students copied node structures. Faculty checked them. Ward engineers installed them. For 24 hours, Bahari stopped behaving like a university and became one enormous workshop. That was when Sefu's investigation finally reached its conclusion. He found me alone for approximately 40 seconds while I was replacing a burnt anchor. They suspended me. I kept working. They said the paper may be withdrawn. I tightened a copper on a bracket. He stepped closer. Amani. What? I need you to tell them we collaborated. I looked at him. There it was. Not an apology. A request for rescue. Months earlier, I might have done it. That realization hurt. Because the original Amani had trusted Sefu enough that part of me still remembered what that friendship felt like. We had studied beneath the same acacia tree. Shared food. Planned apartments in Zanzibar we could not afford. Argued over which Bahari faculty would accept us. He had been family until ambition became more important. I did collaborate with you, I said. Hope appeared on his face. I showed you my work. The hope died. You know what my family will do. I know what Kibo did to me. That was Balu. You changed the stabilizer. His face tightened. I told you I didn't know it would overload. You knew it would make me fail. Silence. I nodded. That is the part that matters. He looked angry then. Actually angry. So that's it. You become some forest genius and now you're better than everyone. There it was. The one criticism that landed. Because part of me had started thinking exactly that. I had surpassed Kibo. Then the guild. I had begun enjoying the way people recalculated around me. Power had become proof. Proof that they were wrong. Proof that I mattered. Proof that nobody could push me around again. Bahari had already shown me how dangerous that thinking was. I was impressive here. I was also surrounded by people who knew things I didn't. I don't think I'm better than everyone, I said. Sefu laughed. Yes, you do. I thought about Zara closing books in my face. Mrema correcting my maps. The first-year student juggling 3 channels while eating fruit. No, I said, I think I'm better than I was. That was enough. Sefu's research placement was terminated later that day. His scholarship remained under review because the university did not punish unrelated academic work automatically. Kibo opened a formal inquiry into instructor Balo. Nobody dragged Sefu into a public hall. Nobody shouted. Nobody needed to. His stolen reputation simply stopped carrying him. The theory he claimed to understand had moved beyond him. That consequence felt cleaner than anything I had imagined. Then the resonance peak arrived. 840 nodes activated across Bahari. For 11 seconds, nothing happened. Then every one of them disagreed. My beautiful network began tearing itself apart. Apparently, reality had one more lesson prepared for me. And this one was going to be expensive. I had designed the network correctly. That was the problem. Every node was following its instructions perfectly. Local towers measured local conditions. They transmitted results. The network compared them, then adjusted. But Bahari was too large. Signals from the eastern island arrived milliseconds later than signals from the west. Under normal magic, that delay was meaningless. Inside an adaptive system responding hundreds of times per second, it was enough to create disagreement. One tower corrected based on information another tower had already replaced. Then the second corrected using data from the first. Feedback, oscillation, runaway synchronization. In my first life, I would have called it a timing problem. In my second, it was making a university shake. Shut it down, someone shouted. If we shut it down now, the breach hits the central core directly, Zara answered. The seawall flickered. Students evacuated the lower courtyards. Transport discs dropped to emergency altitude. I stood in the western tower with the network screaming inside my senses. 840 nodes. Wind, water, stone, light, heat. Higher bands I still barely understood. Too much. Far too much. My first instinct was to take control. Centralize everything through myself. Force the nodes into one rhythm. For a fraction of a second, I could feel how. I had enough access. Enough comprehension. If I pulled the entire lattice into my core, I could probably stabilize it. For maybe 3 seconds. Then my nervous system would cook itself. A year earlier, I might have tried anyway. Because part of me still believed solving everything personally was the safest option. Trust nobody. Depend on nobody. Control the system yourself. That mindset had kept me alive after Kibo. It would destroy me here. Nima's voice came through a communication charm. Amani, node 312 is drifting east. I know. Then why haven't you fixed it? Because fixing it alone makes 313 worse. Good. I actually stopped. Good. You finally found something you can't solve by being annoyingly clever alone. This is not the time. It is exactly the time. I heard shouting behind her. Then quieter she said, "Tell us what you need." Us. Not me. That word changed the design. The network did not need perfect agreement. That had been my assumption. Every node did not need one exact rhythm. They only needed to stay within a safe range. In telecommunications, synchronization could tolerate variance. Packets could arrive late and still be useful. Systems could correct locally without waiting for universal perfection. I had recreated Bahari's mistake in a different form. They trusted one central authority. I trusted one perfect consensus. Both were too rigid. Zara, I'm here. Stop global synchronization. Silence. That is the entire purpose of the lattice. Not anymore. Amani, trust me. I heard Nima laugh through the charm. Zara exhaled. What do you need? Divide the network into 12 regional meshes. Each regulates itself. They only exchange boundary conditions. That creates phase differences. Let them. Another pause. Then Zara understood. The breach doesn't require uniformity. No, only stability. Orders flew. Professors rewrote anchor instructions. Students physically rotated rune plates. Engineers severed synchronization lines. The beautiful, unified network broke apart and became stronger. 12 meshes stabilized independently. Their rhythms differed slightly. Instead of fighting those differences, I used them. Constructive interference where the breach strengthened. Destructive interference where it surged. The university became an instrument with 12 sections playing different notes. For the first time, I understood resonance weaving beyond individual spells. I was not manipulating elements. I was coordinating relationships. The breach expanded beneath us. Every light in the western tower turned violet. I felt something on the other side. Not a creature exactly. Scale. An environment saturated with bands beyond 12. For one instant, the opening widened enough that my senses touched whatever existed beyond it. My knees nearly gave out. I had thought Bahari was the ocean. Whatever lay beyond that breach made Bahari feel like a harbor. I saw no clear images. Only impressions. Magic dense enough to behave like weather. Structures moving through impossible distances. Signals layered in patterns my mind could not follow. Then the breach surged. Now, Zara shouted. I released control. Not power. Control. All 12 regional meshes adjusted themselves. Nima's mapped geometry held the physical pattern. Zara's high-spectrum carriers linked the unstable bands. My adaptive logic allowed every section to respond without waiting for me. 840 nodes shifted. The breach folded inward. Not violently. Quietly. A shrinking ring of violet light became a line. Then a point. Then nothing. The tower stopped shaking. Nobody cheered at first. We were too tired. I sat down on the floor. Professor Zara leaned against the wall. Nima arrived 6 minutes later, covered in dust, carrying a broken map board. She looked at me. I looked at her. Then she held out a cup. Tea. I stared suspiciously. Did you warm it? Yes. Then it's safe. She handed it over. I drank. Perfect temperature. I hated how satisfying that was. 3 days later, Bahari's senior faculty requested a demonstration of the adaptive mesh. Not because they doubted it had worked. Because they did not know what to call it. Ward theory. Multi-channel engineering. Distributed enchantment. Professor Zara proposed a new term. Applied resonance magic. My private joke had become a field of study. That should have been the end of my problem. Instead, Bahari offered me admission. Full scholarship. Private housing. Research stipend. Direct entry into the elite program. 1 year earlier, I would have cried. Now I read the curriculum. Then I read it again. Finally, I looked at Zara. You want me to take Introduction to Multi-Channel Stability? She pressed her lips together. Regulations. I rewrote the Western network. Regulations. The textbook cites a 4-channel ceiling for adaptive casting. It is an older edition. I can use 8. For 12 seconds. 14 now. She rubbed her forehead. Nima was laughing before I even finished. I had finally reached the university of my dreams. And apparently, my next great enemy was course registration. Bahari solved the course registration problem in the most Bahari way possible. They formed a committee. I would rather have fought another night lion. For 6 weeks, I lived in a strange academic limbo. Not officially a student. Not officially faculty. My badge said temporary research specialist, which was basically institutional language, for we do not know what to do with this child. I loved those 6 weeks. For the first time, I had unlimited access to serious magical research. Bahari's library contained living spell records. You could place your hand against a coral branch and feel the casting logic of a mage who had died 200 years earlier. The laboratories had adjustable mana chambers. The observatory tracked atmospheric bands I had never measured. Professors argued about theories I barely understood. Students challenged one another without assuming disagreement was disrespect. I absorbed everything. My 9-band breakthrough happened accidentally. Professor Zara was demonstrating a stabilization sequence. I noticed her transition between the 8th and 9th bands contained a tiny gap. Not an error. A protective pause. Bahari used it to prevent feedback. I tried replacing the pause with a dynamic filter. The first attempt threw me across the room. The second burned 3 practice runes. The third made my teeth vibrate for an hour. The fourth worked. 9 bands aligned. For exactly 2 seconds. That 2 seconds doubled the resolution of my mana perception. The room changed. Magic I once saw as separate colors became layers inside layers. I understood why the Black Root Observatory called 12 bands foundational. The spectrum did not end there. 12 was simply where ordinary local magic became stable enough for larger structures. I told Zara. She became quiet. Then she showed me a locked university archive. For 400 years, Bahari researchers had occasionally detected phenomena beyond the 12th band. They had assumed these were artifacts, measurement errors, cosmic noise. Nobody had ever maintained direct perception long enough to prove otherwise. "Do you know what this means?" I asked. "Yes." "You don't sound excited." "I am old enough to know that every discovery creates paperwork." That became my second favorite thing anyone at Bahari ever said. The first came from Nima. She had received full funding for her deep forest mapping project. The Royal Cartography Board accepted her Black Root maps as evidence toward licensing. One evening, we sat overlooking the Indian Ocean while she redrew the abyssal region on a massive sheet. "You know," she said, "I thought meeting you would ruin my career." "Why?" "First week, 3 goats nearly killed you." "1 goat. History will decide." We had become comfortable enough that silence no longer needed filling. That mattered more than I expected. After Sefu, I had started measuring every relationship for risk. What did they want? What could they take? What happened if they left? Nima never demanded trust. She simply kept earning small pieces of it. Professor Zara did the same. So did Musa back at the guild. Power had not made betrayal impossible. It had made isolation optional. That was a better lesson. Sefu's final disciplinary result arrived during my 7th week. Bahari withdrew his resonance paper. His research appointment was terminated. He kept ordinary student status because his entrance results in unrelated subjects were valid. Kibo revoked Instructor Balo's accreditation after investigators found unauthorized changes to examination arrays and scholarship records. My academic status was formally cleared. Kibo sent me an apology. Then a second message offering reinstatement. Then a third asking whether I would return as an honored graduate speaker. I declined all 3. Politely. Mostly. Sefu found me once more before leaving the resonance program. This time he did apologize. Not perfectly. He still explained too much. Still mentioned pressure from his family. still tried to make desperation sound, like whether that had happened to both of us. But eventually he said the words. I chose it. That was enough for me. Not forgiveness. Not friendship. Just accuracy. I know, I said. He looked toward the university towers. What happens to you now? I almost said I didn't know. Then Professor Zara appeared behind me, holding a stack of papers thick enough to qualify as a weapon. Your faculty examination is tomorrow. Sefu blinked. My what? I asked. Zara handed me the stack. Bahari University had an ancient rule. Any researcher whose independently verified discovery established a new recognized magical discipline could be considered for a faculty chair regardless of educational rank. The rule was almost 600 years old. Nobody had used it in generations. The committee had decided applied resonance magic qualified. I stared at Zara. You are joking. I have never been accused of that. Professor, I'm 17. Yes, the committee has access to calendars. Sefu made a strange sound. I looked at him. For the first time since Kibo, I saw the full reversal. He had stolen my work because he wanted to reach Bahari before me. He succeeded. He became a student here. I had arrived months later through a forest expedition. And now Bahari was asking whether I should teach. I expected triumph. What I felt was almost sadness. We had once planned to reach this place together. His betrayal had changed both routes. I hope you finish your degree, I told him. He looked surprised. So you can steal another paper. He did not laugh. I did. A little. The faculty examination lasted 11 hours. It was brutal. No ceremonial power crystal. No crowd. Just experts asking questions until they found the boundary of my understanding. Spell architecture. Mana ethics. Failure containment. High-spectrum mathematics. Teaching methodology. Field safety. One professor deliberately challenged my distributed network model for 43 minutes. Another asked me to derive a 9-band cancellation structure from first principles. I failed 3 questions. Corrected myself on 4. Admitted ignorance twice. That mattered. At Kibo, I had wanted people to believe I was brilliant. At Bahari, I had finally met enough brilliant people to understand that pretending certainty was dangerous. The last examiner was Zara. She placed a cup of tea on the table. Warm it. I stared at her. The committee looked confused. Nima, watching from the observer seats, immediately covered her mouth. This is harassment. Demonstrate practical magical control. I stabilized 840 ward nodes. T. Amani. I sighed. Cast the warming charm. The cup erupted. T hit the ceiling. For 5 full seconds, nobody spoke. Then one of the oldest professors in Bahari started laughing. Nima nearly fell out of her chair. Zara wrote something on her assessment sheet. What did you write? Room for improvement. 3 days later, Bahari University appointed me assistant professor of applied resonance magic. 17 years old. Youngest faculty member in university history. I stood outside my first lecture hall wearing new blue and gold academic robes and thinking about the boy who had once sat outside Kibo with 6 silver pieces and a broken future. Then the doors opened. 112 students waited inside. Several were older than my mother. Professor Zara sat in the back row. Nima occupied the front with a cup of tea she had clearly brought just to threaten me. I walked to the center and started teaching. Being Bahari's youngest professor lasted exactly 9 days before the universe reminded me that titles are only impressive within the system that issued them. My first week was chaos. Students packed every applied resonance lecture. Half came because they wanted to learn. The other half came because they wanted to see whether the 17-year-old professor was real. I disappointed the second group by being extremely real and assigning homework. I discovered teaching was harder than spell combat. A spell did not become offended when corrected. Students did. A spell never asked whether something would be on the exam 6 seconds after I said it was important. Students absolutely did. Nima attended whenever she was in Zanzibar and rated my lectures without permission. Too many diagrams. It's a technical course. Still too many diagrams. You draw maps for a living. Maps are beautiful. They are diagrams. Get out. Professor Zara refused to intervene. She said suffering built character. My mother came from Arusha for the formal appointment ceremony. I had not told her everything during the forest months, mostly because explaining I had entered monster territory after being framed at school seemed like a good way to shorten her lifespan. She stood beneath Bahari's coral arches while the rector placed the faculty sash over my shoulders. Then she hugged me so hard that the youngest professor in Bahari history briefly lost access to oxygen. That felt more important than the sash. Kibo sent representatives. I was polite. The Mara Guild sent Musa, who looked at Bahari's floating towers and complained that nobody had built the guest house near the fishing docks. Nima received her provisional royal cartographer's license during the same month. Professor Zara became chair of the new resonance department because Bahari's administrators correctly decided that giving a 17-year-old complete budget authority might be excessive. I agreed. Mostly. The Black Root Observatory remained active. We rebuilt its monitoring system. The breach stayed sealed. The Abyssal Forest stabilized. For the first time in almost a year, my life felt settled. That should have made me happy. It did. But there was something else. The 12th ring. Black Root had 12 foundation bands. I could now manipulate 9 reliably. 10 briefly. 11 existed at the edge of my perception. The 12th felt distant but reachable. And beyond 12, the university archives had 4 centuries of unexplained signals. I became obsessed. Not revenge obsessed. That fire had mostly burned itself out. This was worse. Curiosity. I spent nights comparing Black Root pulses with Bahari's oldest observations. Nima eventually confiscated my dinner plate because I kept writing equations beside the food. Zara limited my laboratory access after midnight. I found another laboratory. She limited that one too. We developed a healthy professional relationship. Then, 4 months after my appointment, I managed to activate the 12th Black Root ring remotely from Bahari. Only for 1.7 seconds. Nothing exploded. Always a promising start. The university instruments recorded a clean carrier signal, extending beyond the planet's normal mana envelope. I thought it was reflection. Zara thought it might be natural resonance. We repeated the experiment. This time, I modulated the 12th band. A simple sequence. 3 pulses. Pause. 2 pulses. Pause. 3. Artificial. Deliberate. Basically magical knocking. For 6 seconds, nothing happened. Then something knocked back. Every instrument in the room activated. Not overloaded. Activated. Devices designed for 12 bands began displaying additional spaces nobody knew they contained. 13, 14, 15. The sequence continued until 48. Nobody spoke. A symbol appeared above the central array. The Black Root Observatory translated it through resonance rather than language. I understood the meaning before I understood how. External Foundation node acknowledged. External node. Professor Zara gripped the edge of the table. Nima, who had been updating a coastal map nearby, whispered, Amani. Another signal arrived. This one contained structured information. Coordinates, transit requirements, spectrum classifications. Then one phrase repeated clearly enough that even Bahari's translation charms interpreted it. Foundation Spectrum Civilization. I looked at the 12-band diagrams covering our laboratory walls. Foundation. The same word Black Root had used. Not advanced. Not legendary. Foundation. A third signal arrived. This one targeted the adaptive signature attached to our outgoing message. Mine. Resonance Architect identified. Qualification unusual. Origin node unregistered. REQSTNG academic status. Nima slowly looked at my faculty sash hanging over a chair. Then at me. I knew that expression. No. She smiled. Professor. Don't. Apparently you're applying to school again. Zara laughed. Actually laughed. I stared at 48 glowing frequency bands, filling the laboratory air. At 17, I had already lived 2 lives. I had gone from defective wind mage to bounty hunter. From bounty hunter to the strongest resonance caster in the Mara frontier. From Kibo reject to Bahari researcher. From researcher to the youngest professor in the university's history. I had spent most of that journey believing power meant reaching a point where nobody could ever make me feel small again. Then Bahari showed me a larger world. And now something beyond Bahari had answered my knock and revealed another scale entirely. Strangely, I wasn't afraid. Not much. I looked at Nima, at Professor Zara, at the maps, the equations, the university towers beyond the window, and the ocean shining under moonlight. Kibo had once been my whole future. Then Bahari had been the summit. Both had been real. Both had mattered. Neither had been the end. I smiled at the 48 bands. In my first life, I had spent years building networks so distant people could reach one another. In my second, I had finally sent a signal far enough to discover just how much of the world had been waiting on the other side. And this time, when the unknown answered, I wasn't standing outside a locked gate. I was the one who had opened the connection.